the 1960s, computer scientists have taken inspiration from neo-Darwinist evolutionary theory. The idea of using simulated evolution to breed solutions to problems gave rise to the approach of machine learning known as evolutionary computation. Made popular by artificial intelligence pioneer John Holland in his 1975 book Adaptation in Natural and Artificial Systems, genetic algorithms solve problems by harnessing the power of modern computers to simulate accelerated artificial evolution. The standard or simple genetic algorithm is a parallel optimization algorithm that relies on the artificial evolution of a population of potential solutions, guided by a fitness function. The popularity of the simple genetic algorithm is explained by the fact that the idea is simple and yet quite convincing and powerful in practice. It is also motivated by the fact that evolution is known to be a successful and robust method for adaptation within biological systems. In this session, we will study this genetic algorithm in details. Let's start with an example. Imagine that you want to design the most compact antenna that will work really well for space exploration. Let A be the space of all the possible antenna designs that you can think of and build. You do not know how to design antennas, but you have an antenna simulation program that, given a plan for a particular antenna, will tell you how good it is. The antenna simulation tells you how good the antenna will be at receiving signals, how solid and robust it will be, how small and lightweight it will be, and how costly it will be to deploy. The systems will integrate all that information and give you a score for the antenna that will be a real number above 0. We call this score the fitness function. Let's say we have a fitness function that for each possible antenna tells us how good the antenna will be. The goal is to find the antenna that maximizes the fitness function. Of course, the problem is that you have no clue which antenna will maximize the fitness function, nor how to design an antenna that achieves a good fitness function. The standard genetic algorithm solves this problem in the following fashion. We will see the algorithm in more detail later in this lesson. But here is the basic 8 steps. First, you start by generating a large population of random antennas. Because you generate them randomly, some are small, some are big, some are angular, some are curved, some are heavy, some are light. Let's say you generate an initial population of 1 million random antennas. Second, you then test them all using your fitness function. Because these were randomly generated, it is very unlikely that any of these will be any good. However, they are not all equally poor either, and some will be slightly better than others. Third, you select pairs of antennas with a probability proportional to their fitness function. The better an antenna's fitness score, the more chances it has to be selected. In this first generation, the best antenna will still be of very poor quality. Optionally, you made the antennas you selected by replacing parts of them with parts of others. Optionally as well, you mutate them by changing one of their characteristics randomly. Perhaps you make a little bit of the antenna longer or shorter, things like that. Following that procedure, you regenerate a second generation of antennas with 1 million antennae in them, most of them different from the antennas from the first generation. Then, for this second generation of antennas, the best of which are barely better than those of the first generation, you do the same thing to generate a third generation. And you repeat this for hundreds or thousands of generations. You may already envision this intuitively, but we can show that this process will converge toward the best antenna possible, provided that this antenna actually is in the search space. In fact, since 2004, NASA has been using a series of strange-looking little antennas that were evolved using the computational evolution process I just described. The antenna in this picture here is the size of a coin. These antennas, which are used on various special projects and satellites, are better than any human-designed ones. We can clearly see the generative potential, the creative or synthetic intelligence of the evolutionary process in action. The difference with biological evolution is that computational evolution does not take 1 million years to go through 10,000 generations, but rather hours or days on a supercomputer. And one thing we know is that computers are getting faster every year. So simulated evolutionary processes are becoming more and more promising as time advances. Keeping this example of high-performing antennas in mind, let's get back to the standard genetic algorithm. We will define it a little bit more precisely now. There are three main ingredients to the standard genetic algorithm. The first ingredient is the representation for the individuals or candidate solutions. We need to define the search space of the algorithm. We need a scheme for encoding the individuals by recording what we call the genotypes or chromosomes. Secondly, we need a set of genetic operators. The main operation is usually the crossover, used to mix parents' genes to form new offsprings. The second operation is random mutations, as we discussed in the antenna example. And then the third ingredient to the standard genetic algorithm is a well-defined fitness function that tells us how fit a given individual is. That was the fitness function in our example that told us how good an antenna was, how good was it at receiving signals, etc. So the first ingredient is the representation of the individual. Before we discuss that further, we need to introduce some more vocabulary. An important distinction is between phenotype and genotype, or between individuals and their chromosomes. To define a search space for the algorithm, we need to encode each potential solution as a chromosome, also called a hypothesis. The encoding needs to be reversible in the sense that we want to be able to get back to an individual once we have its chromosome. Sometimes individuals are encoded in a way that is isomorphic to what they are, while other times the individuals are obtained by a different process that uses the chromosome as an input. In other words, this encoding can be direct or indirect, and it can be complete or partial. Once we have defined how a chromosome encodes an individual, we are in a situation similar to biology, where the genotype of an individual is the set of genes it carries, while its phenotype is all of its characteristics as determined by both its genotype and its environmental influences as an individual. Whatever the encoding is, the genetic algorithm works with the genotype and manipulates the hypothesis, and we call the encoding of an individual its chromosome, genes, or genotype indifferently. The fitness function, on the other hand, operates on the phenotype. It operates on the individuals, not on its chromosome or genotype. Individuals in genetic algorithm are often represented using chromosomes made of bit strings, because it simplifies the definition of the genetic operators. As you know by now, pretty much anything can be represented as a bit string, since this is all computer can manipulate after all. For example, the design of an antenna can obviously be represented that way, as can the parameters of a particular system or any other representation you can think of. Suppose that we are interested in the weather. We can have a domain with a set of possible outlooks, let's say sunny, overcast, and rainy. And we can use a chain of 3 bits to encode them, with the first bit standing for sunny, the second one for overcast, and the third one for rainy. So the chain 010 will stand for overcast, 110 will stand for sunny and overcast, and 111 will stand for all 3, sunny, overcast, and rainy, being true. Then we can consider possible wind forces as another dimension in our encoding, with the 3 values weak, medium, and strong. Again, we can use 3 bits to encode the current state. If we want to represent a rainy outlook and strong wind, we can use the concatenation of the 2 corresponding strings, in this case 001, 001. We can encode rules that way too. Each rule's preconditions and postconditions are represented in a similar fashion, using concatenations of bits representing characteristics and properties. We can concatenate the preconditions and the postconditions if we know how long each is. Let's say we use 3 more bits to encode the action to do depending on the weather. So we will have 6 bits for the preconditions, the weather, and 3 bits for the postconditions, the resulting action. Let's say the possible actions are work on project, windsurf, or go tanning at the beach. In that case, what would this particular chain of 9 bits encode? It will encode a rule saying that if it's not sunny and no matter what the wind is, then I will work on my project. Each attribute, which is a dimension of the genetic space, is represented as a fixed length bit string representation. In this case, a hypothesis is the concatenation of a variable number of rules. We might even want to evolve the set of rules that yields the behavior that is the most adapted to the world and therefore fit, as represented by the fitness score. Again, many other representations are possible, and choosing the right representation is a crucial step in using genetic algorithm in practice. Whatever the encoding-decoding scheme is, it is important that each valid hypothesis or individual can be encoded as a chromosome to access the full search space. It is also important that any string, encoding, or chromosome corresponds to a valid individual or phenotype, so that we do not search outside of the search space. The second ingredient of the genetic algorithm is a set of genetic operators that are available to the algorithm. There are a wide variety of genetic operators, but the two basic operators are crossover for mating and random mutation. These come in a variety of versions. Here are examples of crossovers. In the single-point crossover, you choose a place in the chromosome, split the chromosome of each parent at that point, and then recombine the first part of the first parent with the second part of the second parent. Combine the second part of the first parent with the first part of the second parent, and you obtain the two offsprings. A two-point crossover is the same idea, but you split the chromosome at 2 points, which gives you 3 different parts for each gene. Here again, you just swap the corresponding parts from one parent to another to generate the offsprings. Then you have the uniform crossover, where you decide randomly for each bit whether you exchange the 2 bits of the 2 parents or not when generating their offsprings. The basic mutation operator consists of randomly selecting one bit in the chromosome and flipping the state of this bit. The third and final ingredient that is fundamental to the genetic algorithm is the fitness function. The fitness function is what specifies how adapted, fit, or good an individual or potential solution is. In principle, the genetic algorithm solves the design problem. Instead of knowing how to design the solution to a problem, we just need to know how to recognize the solution. We need to know how to evaluate how good a candidate solution is. If, for example, the problem is a classification problem, and the hypothesis space is made of a set of rules, then the target function has one component that's called the classification according to a set of training examples. For example, the percentage of examples that are properly classified by a given potential solution represented by the set of rules could be a good fitness function. Here, the simple genetic algorithm is presented as a proper algorithm in pseudocode. The first input parameter is P, the number of hypotheses or individuals to be included in the population, or the population size. R is the fraction of the population to be replaced by crossovers, and M is the mutation rate, the percentage of the population that is to be mutated at each generation. The first step is to generate the initial population, P0, with the number of hypotheses generated at random. We will see other ways to initiate the population later on in this class. Then we enter a loop. While the maximum fitness of the current population is not above a certain threshold, or the ending condition is not met, we keep executing the loop. For each iteration, we select 1 minus r times p members of the current generation, pt, where t is the generation counter. And you add them to pt plus 1, the next generation. These 1 minus r times p are all selected from the current population using a probability distribution proportional to their fitness. This probability of selecting a particular hypothesis, P of h, is proportional to the fitness of the hypothesis with regard to the total fitness of the population, hence the ratio here between the fitness of the individual and the sum of the fitness of all the individuals. Then we apply crossover by probabilistically selecting r multiplied by p divided by 2 pairs of hypotheses whose offsprings are added to pt plus 1. This gives us exactly r times p offsprings, where r is the crossover rate. Altogether, these 1 minus r times p selected individuals and these r times p offsprings reconstitute a new generation with exactly p individuals. We now apply the mutation operator to m% of p t plus 1, the new generation. The m times p individuals are selected randomly, that is with uniform probability. That is, we just randomly take a certain percentage of the newly constituted population and mutate those individuals. Finally, we update the population pt with pt plus 1, which is now completed. And we iterate this loop until we reach the ending criteria. We just evolve generation after generation through this fitness-based proportional selection plus crossover and mutation. Eventually, the algorithm returns the hypothesis with the highest fitness once one of the hypotheses is good enough or the ending criteria is met. The simple genetic algorithm uses what we call fitness proportionate selection. It is also called roulette wheel selection. Here is an example of such a selection. If we have a population of 100 individuals, a mutation rate of 10%, and a reproduction rate of 10%, then this is your total population on the right. Each individual is represented here with a volume proportional to its fitness. 90% of the new population is just individuals from the current population selected with a likelihood proportional to their fitness. This means that a given individual can be selected several times and therefore appear several times in the new population. The remaining 10% are generated through crossovers, that is 5 pairs of offsprings. Then, on the 100 new individuals, in fact only 10 of them are really new, we apply mutation on 10% of them. And that's our next population. This is known as the simple genetic algorithm, initiated in the 1960s by Holland, De Jong, and Goldberg. There has been much research on this type of algorithm since, with many variations proposed throughout the years. For example, the ending criteria does not have to be that a fitness threshold has to be reached, as in the version that we just presented. Instead, the algorithm can simply run for a fixed number of iterations or for a fixed amount of time. Time, memory, computational power, patience, or even funding may be limited. And maybe what decide how long the algorithm runs. Another smart stopping criterion is when evolution stops creating better solutions. In other words, when there hasn't been improvement in fitness for a long time. If for several thousands of generations in a big population there's no improvement whatsoever, we might decide that the evolution has finished exploring the space of possible solutions, and an optimal or near-optimal individual has been found. Numerous variations on genetic operators have been proposed and explored too. There has been a lot of work done on variations for crossovers. For example, as early as in 1993, in a system called Gabil, De Jong and others proposed extending the 2 points crossover we mentioned earlier, in which 2 points are chosen in one parent at random. The distance to the closest rule boundary on the left or on the right are calculated, and 2 crossover points that respect these distances are chosen in the second parent. Then the 2 resulting offsprings are created. For example, here we have selected 2 parents A and B. We choose 2 random points in parent A. It happens that the first point is 3 bits into the second 9-bit rules. So in parent B, we put that point 3 bits into a randomly chosen rules, which is the first one for B in this case. And then the second crossover point in A is 1 bit before the end of a rule. So in parent B, we put that crossover point 1 bit before the end of another randomly selected rule. If we combine the beginning of parent A with the middle of parent B and the end of parent A, you obtain this long first offspring here with 4 rules and a second offspring with only 1 rule. This variation in the crossover operator allows variation in the size of the chromosome. Using this method, the appropriate number of rules can be evolved. This added flexibility regarding the size and therefore the complexity of the genome allows for the solution to match the complexity of the domain at hand without knowing it in advance. Among other variations on genetic operators, there are new operators that have been proposed. For example, an operator for this specific encoding of rules would be to add an alternative by randomly adding a 1 in the condition of a particular rule. Another example is to drop a condition by turning all the bits of this condition or feature to 1, thus eliminating it, since any value for that feature will select the rule. This operator corresponds to a generalization in the search space. Some bits can be used to encode rules types or which operator can be applied to a given rule. For example, here we can use 2 bits at the end of each rule to say which of the 2 mutation operators can be used on a rule or not. The encoding of individuals and the operators can be as complicated as we want. Genetic algorithms can in principle be used to evolve their own hypothesis search method by encoding it as part of the genome. In general, any operators can be designed and used as long as they preserve the integrity of the offsprings. What is important is that given a well-formed chromosome as inputs, a given genetic operator returns one or several well-formed chromosomes as outputs. In evolutionary computing, in general, biology evaluation is used as an inspiration rather than a constraint. In practice, people completely deviate from operators that would be found in nature. And that is completely fine in the context of artificial life and research in computational creativity. If we take the analogy of a search in the space of possible individuals, various operators correspond to different types of moves in the search space. A simple one-point mutation in a very long chromosome will often be a small move in the search space, resulting in related individuals, while a crossover can be a big jump to a different region not explored yet by generating offspring that are very different than their parents. As often in machine learning, the balance between exploration and exploitation is crucial, and carefully crafted operators are important to help the system to converge efficiently to high-fitness individuals. The third major ingredient we need to define for genetic algorithm is the fitness function. The fitness function is the guide of the evolutionary process. It tells us how well adapted or desirable a given individual is. In optimization, we call the function that we search to maximize or minimize the objective function, because that is the function that tells us how good we are doing regarding our goals and the objective of the search. In genetic algorithm, the fitness function is our objective function. There are 3 families of approaches to define the fitness function in genetic algorithm. The first family of approaches is to define an explicit fitness function. That is, an explicitly defined fitness function or procedure that scores any instance according to its performance regarding a given specification of our objectives. For example, an explicit fitness function can score a given antenna according to how small or light it is, how well the antenna receives or emits a signal. Another explicit fitness criteria is the distance to the optimal solution in a given metric, if the optimal solution is known, which is rarely the case. Very often, there is more than one objective to be optimized. For example, the antenna needs to be maximizing its receptivity, which might be the most important parameter, but we also might want to minimize its size, weight, and the cost of building it. In these cases, in which several objectives are being pursued, we use a multi-objective fitness function. There are various ways to deal with multi-objective fitness functions. One way is to use a linear combination of the various fitness objectives. For example, we can use the following formula to measure the fitness of a given antenna. F reception uses the antenna simulator to return the quality of the signal reception between 0 for no reception and 1 for perfect reception. F weight is the weight of the antenna in proportion to the weight of the rest of the satellite, such between 0 and 1. And F compactness is the volume used in proportion to the total volume of the satellite. 100, 10, and 5 are just the weights we give to these criteria. In this case, reception is 10 times more important than weight, which is itself more important than compactness. Another way to deal with multiple objectives in an explicit fitness measure is to consider the Pareto front of the solution space. The Pareto front is a set of so-called non-dominated solutions. The Pareto front corresponds to the set of solutions for which you cannot improve one of the functions without compromising the quality of the other one. For example, here we have 2 dimensions, the quality of the reception of the antennas on the vertical axis and their energy efficiency on the horizontal dimension. It so happens that as the energy efficiency improves, the receptivity decreases. Given the Pareto front at a given point of the search, it gives us a set of non-dominated solutions such that if you want to choose a solution with better receptivity, it will be less energy efficient. We will look in more details at Pareto fronts and Pareto dominance later on in this course. The second family of approaches to the fitness function is to use an implicit fitness function. As the name suggests, in that case, there is no actual fitness function. The fitness of an individual is not explicitly measured, but simply depends on its performance in a simulation. Note that nature uses an implicit fitness function. This is the approach that is used when one extends ecosystemic approaches to multi-agent systems with evolutionary computation. For example, we can evolve the behavior rules and other aspects of an agent architecture. At birth, the chromosomes is decoded into an individual, possibly through the complex and progressive process of morphogenesis. Then the individual is plunged into its environment, and the simulation determines if it gets to reproduce and whether it will mutate. We will see concrete examples of this approach to implicit fitness function later on in this course. The third and last family of fitness functions is interactive fitness functions. We know that the fitness function drives the evolution. It decides which direction the evolution should pursue by selecting the individuals that will survive, reproduce, and mutate. Unfortunately, it is not always desirable, easy, or possible to design an automatic fitness function. One solution is therefore to ask one or several human operators to act as a fitness function. Typically in interactive genetic algorithm, or IGA, a human user is presented with selected individuals from the current population and expresses preferences regarding which individual should be kept or given weight for the next generation. Interactive genetic algorithms are an example of human computation in the sense that the human does the complex part of the work, the part that the machine is not necessarily capable of doing, and the machine takes care of the more mechanical dimensions such as mating, mutation, and those operations to move from one generation to another. In a sense, interactive genetic algorithms have been known to humanity for thousands of years because domestication of wild animals has been done that way. In the 1950s, Russian geneticist Dmitry Belyaev started an experiment in the domestication of silver black fox that is still continuing now. The experiment started by selecting 100 vixen and 30 male foxes in fur farms in Russia that seems less shy and aggressive with humans than the others. Since that initial selection, 50 generations have been bred. In each generation, the 10% tamest foxes were selected and fur was made out of the rest. After 50 generations, it resulted in tame, friendly, and social foxes that wag their tails and act much like dogs. New morphological traits have also appeared: shorter legs, curlier tails, and narrower skulls. The fox started to look more delicate and, in a word, more cute. By intense selective breeding, a process that generally unfolds over thousands of years, has been completed in 60 or so years. In interactive genetic algorithm, the compression is even more extreme, as we will see when looking at examples later on in this session. This concludes our review of the different types of fitness functions: explicit or direct fitness functions, implicit or indirect fitness functions, and interactive fitness functions. Now we will look at variations in selection functions. The simple genetic algorithm that we studied used a fitness proportional selection function, also known as roulette wheel selection, but a number of other variations on this particular selection function have been proposed and explored. One such variation is truncation selection. In this system, hypotheses or chromosomes are ranked, and a certain percentage of the top performers are selected and reproduced a certain number of times. So only the very top best individuals are used in the process. This selection method is not used in practice because it typically reduces diversity too much. In fact, you really need more than only the best individuals to reproduce and select. With the fitness proportional approach that we studied, even an individual with a fairly low fitness still has a chance of being selected. Even though the likelihood is lower, it is still not zero. Tournament selection is another variation. In this variation, two individuals are chosen at random and the fitter of the two is kept with probability p. This gives a more diverse population than proportional selection because when two very bad candidates are selected, one of them will win the tournament and make it to the next generation. Then there is rank selection variation. We first sort the population by fitness, as with the truncation selection, and then we select individuals with a probability that depends on their rank as opposed to their fitness value. There is also the reproduction specialization selection method. This variation allows only similar individuals to reproduce, which encourages the creation of clusters or subspecies in the population, which allow the development of evolutionary niches. Yet another variation on the selection function is to spatially distribute individuals and allowing them to only reproduce with nearby ones. This is something used in simulated evolution in ecosystems. In virtual ecosystems, the variety of variations for selecting individuals fit for reproduction or for individuals to select each other includes, but is not limited to that of natural ecosystems. And the final variation in selection method that we will discuss is fitness sharing. With this method, the fitness of an individual depends on the presence of similar or dissimilar individuals. For example, fitness could be reduced by the presence of too many similar individuals in the population. One consideration when choosing a selection function is crowding. Crowding is a phenomenon that occurs when only highly fit individual reproduces so much that copies of very similar individuals takes over a large fraction of the population. It reduces diversity and thus slows down the search. Because diversity is a big concern in evolutionary computation, many solutions have been proposed to try to maintain diversity. One solution is to apply some variations of the selection function to try to reduce crowding. Another solution is to explicitly forbid duplicate individuals and to instead generate new individuals to replace duplicates. Genetic algorithm can be seen as searching the space of candidate solutions in parallel. The multiple strings of related individuals are sampling multiple regions of the search space simultaneously. Notably, the rate at which a given region is sampled tends to correspond directly to its elevation in what we call the fitness landscape. In other words, the more the fitness of the individual in a given region of the search space is high, the more likely it is that the population includes numerous individuals that correspond to this particular part of the search space. So the distribution of the individuals in the space is conditioned by the fitness landscape. In conclusion, the genetic algorithm is a very generic algorithm that radically changes one's perspective on generation. Instead of generating individuals according to an algorithm, we simply specify what we want and let the evolutionary process breed and therefore generate fit individuals for us without necessarily knowing what will emerge from this process. With genetic algorithm, the creative process is described as a search through the set of all possible chromosomes or hypotheses using a fitness function that assigns a score to each individual and the evolutionary process. There is no limit in principle to the complexity of what can be evolved. Genetic algorithms are the paradigmatic approach of evolutionary computation and are known to be capable of very complex searches in domains in which the impact of parts on the overall individual fitness may be difficult to model. It is not surprising that artists, designers, and creatives have used this approach in generative art and computational creativity. The rest of this session and the next one will go into more details regarding the past and current work using evolutionary computation in practice. We now have a strong foundation with genetic algorithm, and we will be discussing examples in the next lesson.